If you ever fancied finding out about a case where the judge literally wishes torture on the defendants, well, you've tuned into the right channel today. Hi guys, welcome back. Thanks for joining me. Today's case is one that makes you question the goodness of humanity. It's as simple as that. In fact, it shatters any illusion that evil is rare or that monsters only exist in fiction. I promise you, the case of Tyler and Krista Schindley is one of those cases that genuinely evidences that evil is happily residing in suburban homes at times. They were so incomprehensibly cruel, they were so disgusting and grotesque as parents and caregivers that it literally forces us to just confront the darkest depths of human behaviour. Because believe me, on the surface, the Schindleys appeared to be this loving, stable family. They lived in a beautiful home in Griffin, Georgia. They had adopted 5 children because they're such good people. So from the outside looking in, everybody seemed to believe that they embodied this picture of care and compassion. But we all know, the truth is, appearances are very often dangerously deceiving, because behind closed doors, one of their adopted children, a 10-year-old little boy named Evan, he had been singled out for the most horrific and barbaric torture. He'd been intentionally starved. He was literally denied the very basic necessities required to survive, until one day, by some unbelievable sliding doors moment, by some divine intervention potentially, he managed to escape. Strap in. This is one of those cases that is going to make you feel really angry and also make you question just what is happening in our neighbourhoods. So often we think that we live in a place of safety and we've got no idea what is playing out behind closed doors. Also, before I crack on with today's true crime case, just to say my new merch is out. If you do fancy getting your hand on one of these bad boys, of course, do follow the link in the description below. Let's talk about Krista and Tyler Schindley, Mr. and Mrs. Perfect as far as they were concerned, the way that they were playing to the world around them. So they began dating around 2012. They actually got married pretty quickly, within a year, and at this point they moved to Georgia. They lived in a $450,000 5-bedroom home. They actually managed a couple of locations with a spa business called True Spa, and the couple had 3 biological children. All of them were sons. Now, one of their sons didn't live with them, and we'll talk about that later on as to why. I would say incredible good sense. But also, 2 of the sons were from Tyler's relationship with his previous wife, and just 1 was from Krista's past relationship as well. So it was a blended family. Krista had apparently always wanted a big family. We are all going to be asking ourselves why, because clearly she was not a good fit to be a parent. But they thought to themselves, well, if this is what Krista wants, why don't we go ahead and create it? So they decide to adopt more children together. Now, they begin as foster carers, and in total they fostered 8 children. 5 of those they actually go on to adopt. These were all biological siblings. So there were 2 sets of twins and also their 10-year-old brother named Evan. And we'd imagine, well, how wonderful. These upstanding members of the community, these business runners, and also these people who are so charitable in their heart, they open their homes to all these children. And not only open their homes, they adopt the children that they'd initially fostered. What could possibly be terrible about these human beings? Well, I'll tell you why. Because surface value is one of those things that once scratched, you often see the darkness beneath. And it's very much about how they appear to the rest of the world. That is the most important thing psychologically, emotionally, and socially for this couple, believe me. Now, in 2020, this is when they formally go ahead and adopt all 5 children. Like I said, the outside looking in, they seemed like this happy family. They were absolute avid churchgoers. So there again, keeping up those appearances, and their friends and neighbours apparently knew them as being altruistic. Again, that's a great quality, to be altruistic. We all know that. Most of you listening now, you'll have altruism running through your veins. You'll be people who just really care about other human beings, and you want to know that they're safe, you want to know that they're tended to, you'll do what you can to help them. But there is this small minority of people who go to church, who seem to always be in the right place in the right moment, who are actually deeply narcissistic, and it's all about being seen as someone important in their neighborhood. That's the important facet of why they're actually going ahead and being so present in these situations. And in this case, 100%, that's what this couple fit into. Now, on May the 12th, 2023, Evan Schindley, this is a 10-year-old adopted child. He is the sibling of the two sets of twins, but obviously he's not a twin himself. And he's discovered by one of his neighbours. He's alone. He's not got shoes on, and he is just desperately looking for food, which is heartbreaking, full stop. He was wandering on Westminster Circle, and he was said to be heading to a Kroger, which was close by. He's desperate to eat. It's obvious to that neighbour immediately when he looks at him that this child is incredibly skinny. In fact, he was so slim, so tiny, he could barely support himself to stand up. So just imagine the dehydration, the malnutrition that's going to be causing that kind of impact on the body. He's also bruised, really severely malnourished. He weighed just 37 pounds. Now, to just give you a perspective on that weight, a normal 10-year-old boy would average between 54 to 102 pounds. So we're talking about him being half his body weight that he should be. And he actually asked the neighbour to, quote, please not make him go back. He's terrified, he's desperate, he's seen that this is one opportunity for escape. He's seen this adult, bear in mind, if your life has been challenging anyway, you've ended up in the foster care system, so let's be clear, he's going to have had a struggle with his own family. That's why he's ended up in foster care. Then to be adopted by basic monsters, because they absolutely are. The idea is, therefore, that adults fail you, and they fail you consistently, and you're put at risk consistently. So taking that leap of faith and trusting that neighbour and pleading with that neighbour, please don't make me go back, it really is taking a risk, because he probably knows that if that neighbour's on the side of the parents, something truly dreadful could happen to him. And reaching out in that way takes an enormous amount of courage. Yes, desperation as well, but deep courage. And this is what this child is showing in that moment, just asking and pleading for that neighbour's help. Now, fortunately, that neighbour can just see by looking at this child, something terrible is happening to him, and he calls the police. And whilst he's actually on the phone to the emergency services, this neighbour says, he's asking us not to tell his parents. I don't know who his parents are. He's begged us not to take him home. So clearly, that adult is trusting this child's perspective and is passing that on to the emergency responders. Now, it's Sergeant Chris Webb, who's the police officer who attends the scene. When he arrived, he said he literally couldn't guess the age of Evan. He was so small, he was so tiny, he just couldn't piss a guess. And he said he was emaciated severely, he was extremely small for his age. He also said that just from looking at him, he could see he'd got discoloured skin. He also noted visible injuries. And Sergeant Webb was actually quoted as saying this really distressing sentence. He said, in my 23 years, I've never seen a kid in his condition. I mean, 23 years of experience, and on that particular day, he sees a child in the worst state of his entire career. It tells a story in itself. Now, it was found that Evan was actually wearing clothing of a toddler's age. He was wearing an age 5 top and an age 6 pair of shorts, and the shorts were actually too big for him. Now, his neighbours, who actually came to the rescue, they knew the family, but they didn't know that Evan existed. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the neighbours did know that Evan actually existed, but the people who sounded the alarm, they didn't even know that he was a child who lived in their locality. And at this point, the police make a decision that given his condition, he's not going to go home. It's going to be unsafe for him to be returned to his caregivers. So at this point, Evan's rushed to hospital. He's immediately treated for malnutrition. And also at this point, he had an extremely low heart rate. So he's dangerously unwell. We're talking about a life or death situation in this moment. And this is a 10-year-old little boy, who's meant to be protected by his adopted parents. Now, Krista and Tyler, they obviously get arrested. This is after the police have been spoken to by Evan. They've taken time to interview him. They've obviously assessed just how dangerous his situation is, and they want Krista and Tyler brought in. Now, the arrest warrant stated that the couple withheld food and hot water from Evan. It's going to be a lot more than that, but at that moment in time, they aren't going to get more information from Evan because he's very unwell and they just need enough to bring them in. It turns out that this couple, who are meant to care deeply for this adopted child of theirs, locked him in a room for extended periods of time. By the way, in this room, there were no lights, there were no clothes, he didn't have any warmth, he was completely isolated from other people. And when it came down to his mouth, he had these really serious dental injuries. He also had disfiguration Did they get treatment for him? Absolutely not. They neglected him on both a medical and dental level. And another thing that they would do regularly was abuse him in front of the other kids. And this is a dehumanizing reality for a child of abuse. So when you were abused in front of your siblings who are kept safe, it gives you a very clear and direct message. That is that you are different and distinct and you are deserving of this punishment, whilst they, the golden children, are treated very kindly. And it makes you aware that you are nothing. It's very much a psychological torture. It's used by abusers everywhere. It's very well known to have an emotional impact on that child because it causes that division, both from the siblings, because they look at that child differently now. Why is he being treated differently? He must have done something wrong. We don't want this to happen to us. So we'll just allow it to play out in front of our eyes. And for the child being abused, it's just that telling indictment for them that there is something wrong with them. And that means the child will often internalize the abuse and make themselves believe that they deserve it, which they clearly don't. And the fact that the parents are happy to abuse them in front of their kids demonstrates that they believe there is a bond of trust, that nobody's going to be going out and telling anybody about what's going on under the roof. And then as time goes on, abusers will say, well, you've seen all this happening. If you were to speak to somebody, we'll just say, well, you knew it was occurring, and you didn't do anything to prevent it, so you were guilty too. It's a very clever way of imprisoning children in the abuse cycle. Now, Marie Broader, who's the district attorney, they believe that Evan escaping and the neighbour contacting the authorities literally saved Evan's life, that he was going to die. She said, it's my true belief that had he not gotten out of the home, this case would be a very different one. And I think I agree, as you will, that when you're at a point where your heart rate is low and when you're not eating and not drinking and no one is aware of your safety, the strong likelihood is you're going to end up dead at some point without that kind of intervention. This child, this little boy, was being starved to death. It's as simple as that. That particular state attorney said, as a mother, I can't comprehend it. As a human being, it breaks your heart. She said, we aren't releasing any photos of this child. Obviously, that makes sense because you've got to keep a child anonymous. Evan, when he's older, probably won't want this story told in general without him being able to be protected from people knowing it's him. And don't get me wrong, maybe down the line he'll talk about it openly. Maybe he'll become an advocate for other victims, but certainly his anonymity is really important. And so they make it clear that we're not going to have any of that in the press. She went on to say, I'll tell you this, the photos are absolutely horrible. And anybody with a human heart who looks at them should be shaken to their core. And again, that's very powerful because that elicits a normal response in typical human beings. You know, we look at photographs. If you're in the jury, for example, in certain cases, and you're seeing abusive photographs of children, it just breaks your heart. That's a typical protective adult response. And the reason it's so powerful is these two parents were bringing up other kids, feeding other kids, protecting and looking after other kids in the home, whilst brutalizing and starving and torturing this other child. They knew how bad it looked. They had a comparison base, but he'd become an object to them. He wasn't a child anymore. He wasn't a 10-year-old little boy. He was a problem, and they decided clearly on a solution. And the solution was he was going to be starved to death. And the very fact that most of the neighbours didn't actually know that there was a child there called Evan, that's protective, isn't it? Because if he suddenly disappears, well, literally no one is going to raise the alarm, particularly raise the alarm of these business people and churchgoers. Now, the police end up having to do interviews with the other children in the family. And at this point, the true reality of the cruelty that he suffered became clear. One of his siblings actually said he couldn't swim very well. So Tyler Schindley would throw a hot dog in the pool and then they'd all laugh as they watched him flounder and almost drown to retrieve it. Can you imagine doing that? Kind of a coward of a man would find it amusing to throw a hot dog in a pool and watch a starving child desperately try to retrieve it, because even though he's risking his death by potentially drowning, the hunger is so absolutely devastating and consuming that he'll risk his life to get that hot dog, because the truth is, without the hot dog, he's unlikely to survive anyway. Imagine enjoying that kind of psychological and physical torture that Tyler clearly did, creating games where it's fun for the family to watch. It was also said that the parents would make him exercise excessively outside without any shoes, and these caused injuries to his feet. This is incredibly common where child abuse is concerned, because what abusers will say to themselves is, well, I'm just making them exercise. At the end of the day, it's a punishment, but it's a punishment with some benefits. At the end of the day, we all want to be healthy, so exercise can never be seen as a really bad thing. And you know, if you're a neighbour and you're seeing a kid having to exercise, and then you're having a conversation with the predator perpetrator in these cases, they will be very quick to excuse this behaviour and say, oh yeah, he's misbehaved, he's going to do 50 sit-ups, but at the end of the day, it's teaching him a lesson and he's going to be healthier for it. So it's that bias of belief that others will have about the acceptability and warrant of the kind of abuse that you are posing as exercise that's going on in front of their eyes, and believe that you are doing it for the right reasons. Now, neighbours end up telling the police that one of the things that they'd noticed about that couple, although they didn't raise the alarm, which is bizarre as far as I'm concerned, is that they'd sometimes go on holiday, leaving some of the kids home for days by themselves. Now, in one of the instances, the couple had reportedly gone on a cruise. Now, I don't know about you. I've got 4 kids. You know, there's a thing you do with kids when you go on holiday, and it's you take them. I get it. Some people might have grandparents who are available who'll take them for a few days here and there, maybe a week at times. But the point is, you make sure that the care is available so your kids are safe. Not this couple, not this apparently doting couple who've adopted all these kids, these church-going, well-to-do individuals. No. They were just like, we're going on a holiday, we're going on a cruise, we're just going to leave some of our kids by themselves. And whilst they were away on one occasion, there was a tornado. And that tornado literally narrowly missed their home. And this is where Evan and their 19-year-old autistic son had been left by themselves. Now, the older son ends up asking a neighbour whether they can use the phone. This is a couple of days after the tornado. They wanted to ring his parents. And this is when those neighbours realise that it's clear those kids have been home alone without the power since the tornado. But it just demonstrates the level of neglect and entitlement of the Schindlers. Now, initially, when they brought in the charge with attempted homicide in the 2nd degree, attempted malice murder, and various counts of cruelty to children, battery, and false imprisonment, and rightfully so. Now, after their indictment, however, the charges against them were actually formalised, and at this point, they each received 1 count of criminal attempt to commit a felony of murder, 4 counts of cruelty to children in the 1st degree, 2 counts of false imprisonment, and battery with family violence. Now, Krista, she was also indicted on 3 counts of aggravated assault and 1 count of aggravated battery. So these charges were actually against the teenage autistic stepson. Now, another person who was arrested with this couple was Ethan Washburn. Now, Ethan Washburn is the 20-year-old biological child of Krista. So he got arrested on 2 counts of aggravated assault. And the reason for that is he had choked Evan using both hands around his neck, punched him in the head, face and body in frequent attacks. So, like I said, it was endemic within this family. It was entrenched within this family, the type of abuse that was going on and the legitimate feeling that they had that it was acceptable to go ahead and beat Evan. Like I said, they dehumanised him to such a degree that even one of their sons was now involved in that abuse. Now, fortunately in this case, Tyler and Krista were not allowed to be released pre-trial, which makes me happy, because very often we do see in circumstances like this, even when there are very serious charges levied against individuals, that they still get to go home. But the reason they're not is they're considered to be a significant flight risk and also a risk to the community. And also they said it was very likely they would attempt to intimidate and influence key witnesses in the case. Presumably, I would assume that's about their other children, Evan's siblings in particular. So they want to make sure they have access to none of these kids and also that they don't have an opportunity to escape. Now we get to April 30th, 2025. This is when the trial begins. The opening statements were read with the prosecution saying, "You are going to hear about the cruel and malicious things that were done to him because they didn't want him." They described Evan as a sacrificial lamb. They said it was the Schindlers who'd wanted twins, but Evan was the cost. So he was the collateral. He was the unwanted child that caused the issue of them having these twins, but with this additional burden they didn't want to be around. So he wasn't just the cost, he was going to be the cost, essentially, in this case. He was going to be that sacrifice. So in order, basically, to adopt the twins, they had to adopt Evan too. Now, we see this quite a lot in adoption cases. Siblings should be kept together. It goes without saying. We see the outcomes where people foster and then adopt children who are from sibling groups. They fare so much better because they're with their bloodline, they're with their history. It makes them feel a sense of belonging and connectedness. So I think it's so wonderful when people do adopt sibling groups. But the idea that this particular couple wanted the twins, but not the individual child, they see them immediately as distinct from one another. It's bizarre, but it's also very telling. And so it seems that the way that they decided to create this solution was they would take what they wanted, which are the twins, but then they'd starve Evan to death slowly and just make him disappear. And that's quite obvious when you think he was deprived of the most basic needs. And the prosecution actually argued that the couple had planned to isolate Evan, to hide him away, so that no one was aware of his existence, and then when eventually he does starve to death, no one had realised. And the court were actually shown pictures of the other children's bedrooms. Imagine being Evan in this moment, because that's what we've got to keep at centre point in this actual discussion. We have to think about the impact on the child. Imagine living in a house, a beautiful house. To all intents and purposes, it's middle class, it's lovely. You should have the trappings of a really nice life. And your siblings do. So your siblings' bedrooms, lovely toys, gorgeous beds, they look like really typical children's bedrooms. Then, you as the child, you get to be in a room with a bare mattress, laid just haphazardly on the floor. You had a puppy pee pad on the floor, because you're not in a sanitary situation. They actually had the windows frosted, so he couldn't see outside. He couldn't just gaze out into the world around him, because he couldn't see. They'd actually nailed shut the outside windows so that you couldn't open them, so he could not in any way, shape or form escape. There was also a lock on the outside of his door. He had scratch marks inside his room because obviously he was desperately trying to get out. There was a bathroom, but even though that might seem like a positive point when I first say it, the truth is the court were told that the bathroom had no light fixtures, no towels, no toilet paper, and also, get this, the tap for the hot water had literally been removed purposefully, so he only had access to cold water. Imagine thinking about these things. Imagine being the adult in this situation who lets this child witness his siblings being treated so well. And then you lock him in this desolate, horrible, dark room. You let him see the juxtaposition of their life versus his life. And that's not enough for you. It's not enough for you to dehumanize him. It's not enough for you to make sure that he's uncomfortable. It's not enough for you to not allow him sanitary situations because of the fact that he's got a puppy pee pad on the floor and you can't really use the bathroom because there's no toilet paper. That's not enough. You need to remove access to hot water because you just want to make sure he's absolutely living in hell. That takes a lot of thought. Somebody's laying in bed imagining what to do next to Evan, how to make his life even more intolerable, and they're doing it really effectively. Now, the defense, who doesn't have one? I mean, genuinely, I think in certain cases you just have this feeling for the defense, don't you, where they hear the story and they're sitting there going, yeah, this isn't going to end well for anyone. Like, it literally isn't going to end well, and secretly probably thinking, I'm really glad you got caught, because I just don't believe that you could be a defense attorney and not feel that in cases like this. They must have been looking at this couple and thinking, what is broken within you? Because the excuse is that Evan had behavioural problems and was, quote, obsessed with food. I don't know how they came up with that defense. So what do you think our defense is going to be? Well, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I've been looking through the facts of this case and you don't really have a defense. Yeah, I do get where you go with that. But I'm just thinking that we could create a defense. Go on them all ears. I mean, you're not a lawyer. You're actually a perpetrator of abuse. But just give me an idea of what your idea is. Right. Well, we say he's got behavioural issues. Yeah, gosh, I'm just going to say that quite a lot of kids in the US do have behavioural issues. Yeah, I've not finished yet. Yes, he's got behavioural issues and he's obsessed with food. Is that really your suggestion? Yeah, he's obsessed with food. I'm just going to throw it out there that he was starving to death because of his obsession with food. Wouldn't his obsession with food maybe make him larger? Not in this case. In this case, his obsession with food is why he didn't ever get any food. I'm just going to walk backwards and ask the judge whether I can leave this case, which wouldn't happen, because the thing about it is when defence actual attorneys go and ask for those things to be taken from them, the judge is often like, no, public defender's available, it's you, carry on. But anyway, this is what is going on. The only defence that they have is that Evan's got behavioural problems and is obsessed with food. And so many of us have access to people in our life with kids who have behavioural issues. Lots of you will be listening to me now and thinking, well, my child's ADHD, my child might be on the spectrum, my child might have some kind of disabilities that also make parenting a little bit more challenging. You love them harder. You make sure that they feel absolutely cherished, because you want to make sure that in your relationships with them, they feel that sense of connection with you, and they know that even when the world doesn't see them sometimes as good enough, they are more than enough for you. And so this defense isn't going to have legs with respect. Also, the idea of saying he's obsessed with food is ludicrous. I mean, basically, Tyler and Krista say they've tried to get him help, but they hadn't been able to find a doctor to diagnose him. Could that be because the diagnosis would be, oh, he has really shitty adoptive parents? Could that be the reason? I don't think you get a diagnosis for that, do you? You know, you pop to the pharmacist and the pharmacist is like, just hang on, Evan. I just pop behind here and get what we need to deal with your situation. And then he just comes out with a massive taser that permanently electrocutes both of the adoptive parents. That would be the solution. But I don't think doctors can actually write a prescription or diagnose what I've just said, even though we all agree that would possibly be the right course of action. And today I'm not going to be alone in this belief system, because believe me, when I talk about what the judge thought of this couple, we're going to realise that he and I are absolute bedfellows in this belief system. But this is the lie. They're telling that they tried to get help for him. They said they were overwhelmed. They were trying to care for all the children during COVID-19 lockdowns. Listen, I'm going to throw it out there. If you're a child who has been starved to the brink of death, you're going to have an obsession with food. It's called, I'm hungry, I'm dying potentially, I need to eat. And the idea of throwing in the old COVID-19, what a load of pathetic excuses. Now, disturbingly, and this is really disturbing, there were people who tried to stop this couple finalising the adoption of the children to the Schindleys. Now, very often I say risk offending, and people haven't, and it's ended really badly for the children involved. But just occasionally we come across cases where people really tried their best, really worked hard to raise the alarm, to sound the alarm. So for example, Sophia Gutierrez, she's a school counsellor at Rock Springs Elementary School. She personally testified in court and said she literally emailed the caseworker prior to the adoption saying this: please do not allow them to adopt him. I do not think they love him. Absolutely amazing professional. Literally saying, I have a really bad feeling about this. This child is not being shown love. They should not be allowed to adopt this child. She also said that she had a conversation with Krista where Krista made it very clear that Evan was being forced upon them. And Sophia said, listen, the couple just want the twins. She said that the school had actually contacted DFCS, which is Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services, and had actually spoken to them about Evan, saying, look, this child is routinely hungry, frequently has very little food for his lunch. So, for example, in one instance, he had some celery. And in another instance, he had a handful of almonds, which is just despicable on every single level. And again, the thing about that is it's psychologically torturous. At first glance, you go, well, at least there was a little bit of food there. But what's really being told there is a story of distinction from friends, from peers, because you notice, you see what is going on in other people's lunchboxes or when they're buying things in the dinner hall. And again, it distinguishes you from the rest of your peers. It makes you feel that you stand out for all the wrong reasons and that you're not deserving. And again, that psychological torture is such a torment for children who are just desperate to be loved. So this particular woman, Sophia, actually claimed that the concerned staff at the school had received a lot of pushback from DFCS about their worries. So basically they're getting in contact saying these are genuine concerns, and DFCS are like, yeah, we don't want to hear those concerns. Now, a caseworker had actually reported that they'd heard the couple say multiple times that Evan was a problem and they didn't want him. Now, to me, if adoptive parents or potentially adoptive parents are saying words like this, they should have all the children removed. It's as simple as that. Because it demonstrates a lack of integrity, a lack of positive intent, and also potential harm that can happen to that child and other children when they forge these bizarre opinions about one child. It's unbelievable to me that this couple was ever allowed to adopt, and it's unbelievable to me that when people actually did bother risking offending and actually did the right thing professionally, as opposed to them being taken seriously, they were kind of batted away instead. The reason that I find this so troubling is the criteria for adoption is strict, and it's strict for a reason. And to have something so clearly damning against this couple, and yet they still be given the child that they've said they don't want for a start, and it's just really an addition to what they really desire, which are the twins, and seemingly with no welfare checks after the adoption has gone through, is outrageous. That's the only word that I can use for it, is outrageous. And Evan, like so many children, just fell off the radar completely after the COVID-19 lockdowns began. He was taken out of school, and of course, again, that removes that other layer of protection. And what happened after this? Well, the parents begin homeschooling. Of course they do, because if you're going to abuse and kill a child, you better keep them away from those prying authorities that might just get in the way. Now, on the second day of testimony in court, a big change occurred. Krista and Tyler pled guilty. And it makes sense, because they were banged to rights. They were dead to rights. These two, they were never going home. They just needed to figure out, is it worth going guilty at this stage to get a sentence that might mean one day we see freedom? Or do we stick this out and end up with an even harsher punishment? Because bear in mind, if this matter had continued to go to court, it was said that the state would have continued to present evidence and testimony that would obviously prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that between the days of October the 30th, 2020 and March the 12th of 2023, they systematically attempted to commit the felony of malice murder. And this is, of course, because they intentionally withheld food, they knowingly withheld medical, dental, and mental health care for Evan. And it was also said that those acts also constituted cruelty to children in the first degree, because they failed to get the necessary dental hygiene products and access to dental care. They had rightfully caused him excessive, cruel physical and mental pain. So rightfully, they are very serious offences, and it's clear that beyond a shadow of a doubt, the prosecution were going to be able to push that narrative and push it effectively. And just to give you a bit of perspective on this, when it came down to that excessive physical pain and the dental issues, he ended up having to have, this is a 10-year-old boy, he ended up having to have 15 teeth removed and 4 crowns that placed on his remaining teeth. Can you imagine the trauma of going through that? Listen, I recently had one of my teeth just filed down a little bit because there was a chip in it. I didn't think it would be a problem. 2 days later, I was like walking around in agony. I've never suffered from toothache before. I cannot imagine what it's like for people who constantly have problems with their teeth. But certainly 15 teeth removed and 4 crowns, that is a huge amount of trauma for this little boy to go through. It'd be shocking as an adult, but the fact that we're talking about a 10-year-old boy shows how completely neglected he was. The prosecution even became really emotional whilst they were listening to the treatment of Evan. And I love that humanness sometimes in prosecutors, you know, where you feel it, they're living it with that person that they're actually trying to protect by fighting the case for them. They're just moral and ethical in those moments, and it shines through. The prosecution actually said if the case had gone to court properly, fully, the dentist who removed his teeth would have given evidence. So again, a very strong case that shows beyond a reasonable doubt that this couple are guilty of what they have been charged with. Now, also, the other 4 children who lived with Evan and who witnessed the abuse, they would also have come into court and testified, which would have been incredibly compelling. They said that Evan had been isolated from his family by his parents, and that they'd also been encouraged by those parents to avoid and belittle him. Again, what really gets me about this particular case is the overtness of the abusers, the overt way that they talk to the other children about abusing their sibling. It's not hidden, it's not done in private, it's not minimized by them, it's encouraged. And also to say belittle him, humiliate him. This is a 10-year-old little boy. What's he guilty of? Having 2 sets of twin siblings that were wanted by this couple, and somehow he's being punished because they didn't want what they agreed to have. And that because of that, he deserves this humiliation. this dehumanization, this torture, this starvation, because that's what we're talking about. Sometimes there are moments when I'll be telling a story in a case like this, and it takes my breath away because I have in the back of my mind an image of that 10-year-old little boy, half the size but his age. And he went through this. He went through what I'm talking about right now. He went through the starvation. He went through the deprivation. He went through the isolation. He went through the brutality, the torture, the starvation. He was that one in the bedroom with just a mattress to lie on, where he couldn't even look out the windows, where the windows were just nailed shut. This is a child that lived this experience that I'm describing right now. It's unsurprising to me that people got emotional in that court. It is absolutely horrendous. But to add to that, the fact that the children were encouraged to belittle him, to isolate him, to avoid him, that means that they're going to be traumatized as well. They've become part of that abuse and they have to live with that. And don't get me wrong, they're not to blame in any way, shape or form. I'm saying they have to live with that. They have to take with them on their journey through life that they were an active part of a child's abuse because they were complicit, because they had no other choice but to be complicit. It's very dangerous for children who are witnessing abuse of a sibling and get involved to try and protect that sibling. Often they then become a threat and that abuse can be turned to them. Now, Judge Benjamin Coker, who I love. Like I said, I usually have more issues with judges than I say positives about, but not where Judge Benjamin Coker is concerned. This guy is so clearly disgusted with the couple and also so motivated emotionally by the case. He actually said, I have seen people do heinous things to each other. I've seen murder. I have seen child molestation. I've even prosecuted a child death where the child was tortured. But as I sit here, I thought to myself, I've never seen a human being who would do what you two did to another human being. I have a special needs son who's autistic, and God blessed him with me as the blessing. Many people don't have the blessing to have children, and you threw it away. When Evan ran away from your residence and you were stopped by police, he never even asked, is Evan okay? That would be the first thing I would have asked. He said, Evan had been so hungry at the hospital, and this is going to break your hearts, guys. This is going to bring into sharp focus what we're talking about right now. This little boy was so hungry at hospital after he'd been found that when crumbs had dropped into a napkin whilst he was eating, he was literally terrified the napkin with the crumbs on was going to be taken away from him. That's how diabolical his situation had been. Mere crumbs was something he wished to protect because he was so desperately hungry and so used to being denied. Now, there is one thing that he did say that was relatively positive, I suppose, about these monsters. He said that he was appreciative that they had eventually pled guilty before the children had to testify in court. He said, though, you sure showed a hell of a time to show mercy on them. And that's right. He's absolutely correct. He's like, okay, I've got to appreciate that you're not going to put them through this trial, but wow, what a time to actually show mercy on them. Maybe you could have done that by not being the abusive monsters that you clearly are. He then went on to say this, under the 8th Amendment, I am not allowed to impose a sentence that is cruel and unusual and bound by the Constitution. You better be glad that I am, because otherwise I would impose a sentence much like the one you imposed on Evan.
Under the 8th Amendment, I'm not allowed to impose a sentence that is cruel and unusual. I'm bound by that oath, and I'm bound by the Constitution. You better be glad that I am, or otherwise I would impose a sentence much like the one you imposed on Evan.
Amen to you, Judge. Literally, can we have more judges like this? Sorry, what's the ruling? Oh, they've gone guilty. Right, great. Just give me a minute. I'm just going to go through my book. Judge, what are you doing? I'm just going through my book. No, Judge, the book's to your right-hand side. Oh, I've got another book though. What's the book? It's Cruel and Unusual Punishments book. I'm not sure that we're ready. Shut up! Just shut up. We're going to just do this. Okay, well, fortunately, paragraph 8.4.3 says that I am able to bestow on the defendants the same that they bestowed on their victim. So I want them to be taken immediately to the cells, just kept there, not fed, maybe occasionally put a sausage on a stick and then keep removing it, so they have to run up and down the cell, and just leave them till they're on the brink of death. And then we'll just do that again for the next 30 years. Sorry, Judge, I'm not sure. Shut up, just get on with it. I'm saying Constitution, I'm just challenging it. We're amending the Constitution, and the Constitution now says that I can say whatever I want to say, and I've said it, so off you pop. I know that can't happen, but the fact that the judge would have liked that to happen really, really makes me smile inside. He also actually told them that if the trial had carried on going on much further, they would be receiving a sentence much higher than they were about to receive. So he's basically letting them know, you better be grateful that you told the truth, even though we all knew what you did. We absolutely didn't need to have the prosecution do anything but present the facts. You were going down. But you better be grateful that you decided to show the world that you were actually accepting guilt, because otherwise the sentence I'm about to pass would have been even harsher than the sentence you're going to receive. Now, he actually sentenced them to 40 years each in prison, and then they'd have to be on probation for a further 20 years. They were also ordered to have no contact with their children or any minors, which makes perfect sense, and they're also not allowed to be around where minors congregate, so they wouldn't be allowed in parks, or they wouldn't be allowed near schools. Now, D.A. Broder, they said that the shame and humiliation that this innocent child was forced to bear did not belong to him. That's so true, isn't it? And I think that's really important of the district attorney to say. It's one of those things that when you think about a case like this, there's so many words that you can say that just highlight the heinous evil of this couple. But there is something about this DA saying those words, the shame and humiliation that this innocent child was forced to bear did not belong to him. That's a message, isn't it? It's such a powerful message that all of us will feel. I just hope that Evan is out there knowing it was never about him. It was always about them. And that the shame that he will have felt, what's wrong with me? Why am I so unlovable? Why am I so worthless? What have I done wrong? You know, trying to own and create that control over his environment by internalizing all the negatives, that hopefully he will be able to exorcise that humiliation, exorcise that pain, see that it needs to be projected back to the place that it came from, onto the monsters that imprisoned him with this false guise of being caring adoptive parents. They added to that statement today that shame and humiliation is back where it belongs, on the heads of Tyler and Krista Schindley. Amen to that. Now, Krista, she did apologize to the court. In fact, she said this, and by the way, hold on to your seats. I don't think you're going to want to have anything that you could throw at your screen or listening device, because it's one of those moments where you think to yourself, yeah, I feel infuriated by the words. So she apologizes to the court and says this: I just pray that God would bring the right parents along to be able to give the younger children a wonderful life. I know the love of God is able to do many things, and I'm trusting him with our children. Sorry, what's that, Krista? You just hope that some nice parents are going to come along to give your kids the wonderful life. You were meant to be those parents, you absolute POS. You were meant to be the trusting individual. You don't need the big G.O.D. The big G.O.D. is closing the door on your face, Krista. Believe me, at some point in time, that's going to happen. It's such an ironic statement. The children had the absolute misfortune to have been placed with them, an absolutely evil couple. They would find it difficult to find a worse couple. Just a straw poll, a raffle would probably see that whoever won the raffle would be a better parent, even if they thought they were just going to get a basket of fruit. If all of those kids turned up, they'd probably do a better job than you. It's as simple as that. Look, I can't speak to how the younger twins were treated. I can't speak to whether those siblings received any other abuse. Apparently, their life was a lot better than Evan, but they still witnessed their brother being untreated really unbelievably poorly. And that is going to impact on them. So they were abused in a different way. And that hugely psychologically damaging experience is going to stay with them the rest of their lives. And whilst it's true that by the grace of God, all of the children will have a nurturing and loving home in the absence of the monster Schindlers, it's bizarre that Krista seems to be saying that she hopes they're giving a family who will give them as good of a life as they would have had. What? They were having an absolutely diabolical time under your roof, Krista. And also calling those kids your children still, that's an insult. You lost the right to be called mother, full stop, let alone to believe that children you'd adopted were still part of your connection. She's got the massive amount of audacity in this moment. She lives in delusion. She shows arrogance, superiority, narcissism. That's the reality in that statement. And the way that she has the audacity to actually speak as if God is on her side just is baffling to me. Absolute child cruelty, child abuse, attempted murder. Just going to throw it out there. It's kind of the opposite of what the big GOD stands for. She is fit straight for hell, in my opinion. Also, the fact that she's referencing the younger children seems to exclude Evan. Even in this moment where she's meant to be apologising, she can't even say anything nice about him even now. What a witch. What a demon. It's as simple as that. And interestingly, and very tellingly, one of Tyler's biological sons spoke to reporters on the condition, understandably, of anonymity. I'm sure that this child of Tyler's has been damaged enough. He doesn't want his face plastered all over the papers. He said that he had run away from the Schindley home when he was 17. So he's still a kid. I know that many people leave home at 17, but you're still a kid. I think it's really sad that kids end up by themselves at that age. I just think there is so much more mentorship that we as parents should give them, or at least enable them to have, should they wish to be around us. But it turns out he leaves because, as he put it, they were abusive to me physically and mentally. It was getting worse and worse every day, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I had to run away. I couldn't leave my room. They would beat me very badly. They would tell me terrible stuff like, you're a waste of space, a disappointment, you shouldn't even be alive. He said my dad would try to convince me I wasn't his son. There were times that I tried asking for help, but they would say bad things about me, tell people I was a problem child. Oh, he's just spouting off lies again. So nobody ever believed me. He said that he was locked in his room for days without food as a punishment. He was made to run in the rain in boot camp style laps. He said that those punishments only applied to him, his autistic brother, and his 10-year-old adopted brother. The two sets of twins and Krista's biological son, they were all excluded from his treatment. He went on to say, when I was young, they would put dish soap in our mouths and make us leave it sitting in there. We couldn't spit it out. As we got older, they realized this didn't work anymore, so they decided to turn up the abuse by hitting us. It went from spanking to hands to belts, wooden spoons. I've been whipped with cords. The worst I've had was a baseball bat. They would hit me in the sides, my back, anywhere that could be covered up with clothing. It became normality for me because it happened every day, even multiple times a day. I would come home from school wondering, what are they going to do to me today? How hard are they going to hit me? It turned out that this same child worked at Dunkin' Donuts and Subway, but he had to give his parents all his money, all his wages. He went on to say there were times when I asked them, what have I done wrong? But they wouldn't answer me, or they'd say things like, you breathed the wrong way, or you looked at me the wrong way. He said my dad was very passive before Krista came along, but she was very narcissistic, very manipulating. And I think he was willing to do whatever she wanted. I think they enjoyed having power over us. All they cared about was projecting this image of a perfect family. But look what's happened. My 5 former siblings are going to be scattered around all over the place, and I don't think I'll ever see them again. That is so devastating for this child, isn't it? He himself had to leave to protect himself. I mean, that's the only thing he could do. He'd obviously been so coerced into believing that he was worthless and useless and deserving of what happened that he didn't even raise the alarm for his brothers, because at the end of the day, he genuinely considered that he wouldn't be believed. He thought that they just were this upstanding couple who have this moral high ground that people believe in. And therefore, if he told on his parents, the chances are he'd have been laughed off because he was a problem child. He was told that by his parents. And it's interesting that he refers to his stepmom, Krista, as a narcissist, because she absolutely is. But I'm not going to let his father off with his behavior just because it seems that the aggression upped when Krista came into his father's life. The reality is it's within him. It might have been passive for a period of time, but then it became very active when he was given the opportunity to take over his own frustrations and stresses on the victims. And isn't it interesting that her child, her biological child, they were treated well? Again, it just speaks volumes because, of course, her child she sees as an extension of her choice. Therefore, she or he gets treated in a much more positive way than the children that she didn't want or didn't give birth to. And something that really stands out to me about this case is the fact that this grotesque couple found each other. You know, they actually could see in one another the evil potential without a doubt. I mean, there are evil people in the world, we know that. But the fact that two people are so absolutely beyond redemption somehow met and also got married, their evil must have attracted one another. It must have been something that they really bonded over. And how does that conversation even come about? How do they start to agree between themselves that they're going to treat this gorgeous little boy in this horrendous way, whilst treating his siblings completely differently? So they know how to act as parents. They can treat children in an okay way. How did they start deciding that Evan was going to be the child who received such ill treatment? I mean, usually if someone wanted to do something really terrible that would maybe act on their evil desires, and they'd keep it to themselves because they've been acting on those evil desires. Because at the end of the day, you should know that you don't want too many people to be aware of the horror that you're bestowing on your victim. But sharing it with another human being and actually believing that human being is going to accept your suggestions, incentivize your suggestions, action your suggestions, it's like they could see that there was no morality within either party. Here are two people comfortable enough being this outwardly evil together and in front of their own children too. It is baffling and devastating. This is one of those totally distressing cases. And I wish that I could say that Evan is okay now. I wish I could tell you a story about his future and that it's been a good future. But we don't have this information. We don't have that availability. Rightfully so, he's got his anonymity. He deserves his privacy. He's only a minor. It's only a recent case as well, so he won't have had too much recovery time yet. But I don't know how he is doing. Hopefully he is now stable and recovering well. That's what I've heard through reports. Hopefully, as well as his siblings, he will get adopted by a loving family who just drench him in kindness and compassion and connection and acceptance and remind him of his worth and his meaning. I'm so grateful to God that he survived that trauma and that his absolute will to survive, his will to live, helped him escape the Schindlers. That's another thing, you know. At the end of the day, he's become their prison guard. They're locked up by him now. He has all the power, all the control. That'll be something that I hope down the line helps him to overcome some of the trauma that no doubt he will have actually gathered during these horrendous experiences. I genuinely feel like you will all feel that the greatest gift is success in these cases. Success is the greatest revenge. And if he overcomes the psychological and physical problems that horrible couple inflicted on him, he wins. He wins on every single level. I want him to have a life of abundance, a life full of love, a life where trust can be rebuilt, a life where one day those horrendous years, months that he spent at the hands of these monsters just dissolve to a point where the loudness of his success and the beauty and joy of his world has the capacity to drown those feelings of trauma out completely. Like I said, it's utterly absurd to me that the alarm was raised. Not just raised by one individual, by several individuals at the school. And those who should have been wanting to protect this child failed to do so. That's a damning indictment of those professional services and tells a story that maybe, sadly, is going to be told again and again and again. Let me know your thoughts, guys. As ever, I'll see you again next time. Be safe.